Hey guys, here's a little guide for you for 5 considerations for PC building. And these are considerations that I've done a lot of research on based off of what I've seen on YouTube, because a lot of tech incumbents and tech YouTubers will be like, this is what you should do, this is what you should consider. And a lot of them kind of stray away from what I feel a lot of gamers, a lot of content creators, a lot of people sort of focus in on that is usually glazed over. And so here are my top 5 considerations for PC building when you want to build your own PC. And the first one I've got here is, what do you want it to do? So it's very important that you stay true to this top consideration here, is what do you want it to do? So if you want to hit 144 hertz and get like a 144 hertz monitor, because you want to play games on 144 at least 144 frames per second, then obviously you're not going to get something like a 1050 Ti unless you're playing like only League of Legends, right? Or if you want to get 200 plus FPS, which is really hard for even a 2080 Ti, unless you scale down the graphics or overclock it, depending on which games you get. So, I mean, when you think about that, naturally your inclination is going to be like, I want the most frames, I want the most performance, I want the fastest speeds. But it's not realistic that you always get the craziest, the best that's on the market, especially if you take a look at what games that you play, right? So it's super important that you take a deep breath, you slow down, and you figure out what is it that you want to do. I want to play Rust on high settings, or I want to play, Valorant on high settings. So take a look at what people go look at other people's streams, go look at people's YouTube gameplay videos of Valorant, of the game of your preferred choice, and see if their settings is agreeable, and then take a look at their specs, because you don't need a 2080 Ti to play games like that on high. You don't even need a 2070, maybe like a 2060 KO. Sure, 1660 Ti 5600 XT is probably in line with that, to getting like high ultra settings, whatever, and getting 100 plus FPS, probably easy. But you can make compromises as long as you understand what is it that you want to do. And the second topic consideration that I have for PC building is a hard line on budget. And what that means is, a lot of times people will say things like, oh, I only have, my budget's $800, my budget's $1,000, my budget's $1,200, or whatever, right? And so they go on to like, let's go on Newegg right here. And you're like, okay, well, my budget's, I want to only spend like $300 on the graphics card, right? And you take a look and you're like, oh, hey, look, there's the KO Ultra. It's $319.99, which is basically $320. But look at that. There's a $20 rebate card that brings it down to $300. Add to cart. I'm gonna buy it right away. Well, hold on a second. So you said your hardline budget was $300. Let's say you want to spend only $300 for the GPU, and you take a look at this and you're like, that fits my price point. First of all, no, it doesn't. Rebate cards, if you've ever taken a look at the rebate forms, they take anywhere from 2 to 3 months for you to get your $20, and it's usually like a Visa gift card or something like that, right? It's not like they don't mail you a $20 bill, and even if they did, that's like hella dangerous, because they get lost in the mail or whatever, and it takes super long for you to get it. So it's not an immediate return. So just pretend that this $20 rebate card doesn't even arrive, because you might even forget it, So just pretend this price isn't there. Okay. So you're looking at this and you're like, okay, well, maybe this one, I can afford to pay $10 more above my budget. Well, wait a second. Create a hard line in the budget. If you say you're not going to go over this price, do not go over that price, because then you're not staying true to yourself. You're paying more than whatever it is that you're going to do. And if you're going to be paying more anyway, you might be considering a better card than the 2060, right? And secondly, when you create a hard line in the budget, one of the biggest considerations that most PC guides do not take, and that's, Bitwit, Linus, Jay-Z, like they all failed to consider tax. And why don't they talk about tax? Because tax is different for every country, right? So for me, I added the $319.99, and then I put it in here, right, into Newegg, and look, the actual price is about almost $350. $350. I mean, that's bleeding on the 5700 XT, between the 5700 and the 5700 XT, going close to a 2060 Super. At that point, you're like, whoa, should I just consider saving up a little bit more money and going to 2060 Super at that point, or the 5700 XT? Because I mean, you're paying $320, and then the tax comes up anyways. So one of the big considerations is tax. Always take a look at tax and shipping, obviously, of course. The total price is more important than the price that you see here, right? The actual price that you pay is more important, and keep that in consideration when you're doing the budget. So the third consideration that I have is aesthetics or performance. So obviously, when we're as gamers, we want the best performance, typically speaking, especially if we don't have money, right? So we want to pay exactly the minimum that's required to get the most FPS. And most people will tell you, whether or not you're Intel or you're AMD, NVIDIA or AMD, people will start to lean more on the AMD cards because they're cheaper, right? And then other people will say, like, well, NVIDIA has the best, has the best frames anyway, and that's worth paying the higher premium. So whatever your take is, understand that there is an aesthetics and then there is performance for every card. If you take a look at here, see, I mean, a 2060 can go anywhere from 389. Like this is a 2060, and this is a 2060, and they're both relatively. You could even say the KO Ultra is better than this one, because this has like a, what is it? I think like the 2070 and the 2080 die on it, even though it's a 2060 with a 2060 architecture. I don't remember. I saw a video about that, but basically, I mean, you can see that, right? So this one, obviously, what you're paying for is a perceived better cooling and aesthetics, right? So it's got RGB built in it, I believe so. I mean, all the Strix ones have like RGB on the backplate. There's no picture here, but it's got RGB, and this one most likely does not. And it's dual fan, so you can argue that the cooling isn't as good. So do you want aesthetics or do you want performance? And be true to yourself. Be true to yourself. Like, do you care about ketchup and mustard power cables, right? Or do you care about having RGB case fans or strips inside of your case? Do you care about whether or not it has, future proofing? And which goes into my my fourth top consideration is research and experience. So if you're an experienced builder, obviously you don't have to do as much research. Sure, you're going to have to do a little bit of research because you want to, you know what you want and you know what you're looking for. For instance, like I want good VRMs, right? I want good VRMs on my motherboard, and I know I need PCIe 4. So I mean, that's you're going to be going for like an X570, right? But always correlate the amount of research that you do with the amount of experience that you have. If you were like me and you had absolutely no experience whatsoever in PC building, you're going to have to do a lot of research. There's just no corners to cut. Like, you can ask a YouTuber, you can go on like Reddit or Tom's Hardware forums or whatever. You can go on tech YouTubers forums, and you can ask people and look at PC Part Picker and ask your friends like, oh, what should I build for $800 or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's your PC. So do your research, okay? Take a look at things like user benchmarks. And I know that user benchmarks gets a bad rap. And one of the reasons that it gets a bad rap is because people take a look at this number right here, game FPS, and think, okay, well, I like the 5600 XT, and I've seen the 5600 XT do better. So I don't know why it gets an 8% performance. People don't realize, for instance, that these are all user inputted. This is the average of user inputted FPS, so you don't know. So you can ignore this. But what people cannot fake, right, is this graph right here. So this is user benchmarks. Their graphics card is pitted against the 100% is basically a 2060 Super. So all the speeds you see here are relative to a 2060 Super. Worst bench and best bench basically means of all the cards, right? Of all the cards, where did it fall? As far as the benchmark speeds that it gets and the score that it got. And a lot of people hate user benchmarks because it takes a look at this and says, well, okay, well, this is 2% better because just on average. So obviously that means the 5600 XT is better than 2060. But hold on a second. You did not take in effect for the fact that there's tons and tons of different brands, right? Between NVIDIA, EVGA, XFX, MSI, Asus, like there's tons of different brands that have much different performance. So the most important thing to look at when you're on user benchmarks that makes it a viable resource that you don't have to immediately just throw it away because, someone on Reddit told you that user benchmark sucks or they're banned or whatever, is take a look at the ratios here, right? And you can see like that most of 2060s score in this range. So you can assume that you're going to be in the 83 to 89%, right? 83 to 89%. And that's sort of reasonable because the worst benches are down into like the 70s or whatever, and you have some outliers there. And for the 5600 XT, you have a decent amount of that's at 82, which is not good compared to like the 82, 83. And that you also have a couple that are at the 88s and 89s, right? Which are on the higher end of the 2060. And you might be wondering, like, what are these numbers? It could be people overclocking. Who knows? Could be people overclocking on this side as well. But the biggest takeaway from this is that it is not realistically 2% faster. The 2060 and the 5600 XT are relatively the same card, because the range that they score between 74 to 91 and 90 to 80, you're pretty much the same. You're going to be losing 2-3% either way. So, at that point, you're just going to be looking which card is cheaper, and obviously that's going to be the 5600 XT. Not because the score is here, all right? Because the scores here, and the price. All these other things, they're just silly, right? These scores right here, they're nice to look at, but ultimately what you want to do is not use user benchmarks as your sole and only resource, right? So use it and then look at other things like this, right? Look at a comparison between the 2060 and the 5600 XT and see what other people got based off of their specs. Usually on YouTube, they will list their specs here. Like, this is what I used, right? So this guy used, he doesn't really name which exact card that he used, but you can see the RAM, you can see the motherboard, you can see the processor and what it's clocked at, and then you can see the relative frames. So PUBG is, for instance, an NVIDIA favorite game. So obviously the AMD cards are going to do worse on it. But it's nice to see that the frame rates right here and right here, they're relatively the same, right? You see it right, I guess, in the middle of the screen as well. And you can see some latency speeds there. You can see the temps as well on the top. Let's see. Yep, the GPU 64 degrees Celsius versus 67. Important to consider. These are all important things to consider. And you go from game to game, and you see, hey, which card is better? Like, hey, for some reason, the 5600 XT is, there you go, there it is. There's some gains over the 2060, I should say. So take a look at all these videos, right? Do your research. Take a look at user benchmarks. Take a look at what other people's experiences are when you're doing your research. And lastly, if you're a new builder like I am, practice. And you might be saying, like, what do you mean by practice? What I did is I went on Craigslist. I went on eBay. I went to Goodwill. I went to salvage stores, donation stores. I went on like forums, like neighborhood forums, and I asked people, and I looked for broken or super cheap PCs. I'm talking about PCs like Dell Optiplexes that you can buy for $5, $10, $20. So buy these computers, tear them apart, and then put them back together again. And that builds you the confidence to build your PC, because one of the biggest things that I see on YouTube, like just flooded in the comments, is a lot of newbie or novice amateur builders, or people who want to build, transitioning from console to PC, and they're just like, I'm too scared, right? They watch these PC guides, these PC building guides, and like, I'm so scared because all the components that I want to buy are going to be like $1,500. I'm going to be holding a $200 processor in my hands, and I don't want to break the pin, right? Or you have a $200+ motherboard, that's Intel, and the pins are in the socket, and you're just super scared that you're going to bend one of those, right? And I understand that. So practice. If you're going to be spending $1,300 $1,000, $800, $500. What's another $10 to $20 buying a super cheap, super garbage PC that works, right? I mean, that's the key thing is that it works, or that you can get it to work, because you can buy like a super cheap, storage drive or whatever, a hard drive, and plug it in if their hard drive failed or whatever, or it doesn't have a hard drive. And practice taking it apart and building it back together again. And so, yeah, those are my top 5 considerations for PC building. If you have any questions, just leave a comment, and I'll be totally more than happy to help you build and help you pick out pieces. Thanks, guys.